Passover is the 26th and final episode of the third season of Rugrats, and I remembered this one in part from my childhood, but not all of it, and I most certainly didn't really remember the story of Passover, so I was very curious to see what this was like. And I have to say, from my non-Jewish perspective, it's really interesting. I'd love to know what you think of this if you're Jewish, or if you know somebody who's Jewish and you know a lot about the faith, because I imagine your opinion might be different to mine, but I have to say it's pretty good. I did have one question as soon as I started watching it, and then Angelica asked the same question, because Charlotte and Drew are driving to Boris and Minka's for Passover, and I'll obviously talk more about that in a moment, and I just thought, why are you going? And Angelica even asked her parents, it's Tommy's grandparents, why are we going? But I guess extended family are family, and even though they're not Jewish, it was nice to invite them. But I'm glad Angelica had the exact same thought that I did. Once I got over that, and we actually got to Boris and Minka's, it was pretty great. And they're getting ready to sit down for the meal, and Tommy and Chuckie and Angelica have already wandered off. They didn't take very long, and they actually get locked in the attic with Boris, who went up there to actually do something nice. And because they're locked in the attic, Boris starts to tell them the story of the Passover. And we see, obviously, the babies taking on different characters. Angelica is the Pharaoh. Tommy is Moses. And Tommy in real life, or in present day, has a little cap on, a skull cap, and I thought that was a really lovely touch, and he looks very, very cute. But he also suits the role of Moses, at least in terms of how well it's animated, and I won't, I'm not going to recount the entire story of Passover, but it's really fascinating. I knew the bare bones, I still know basically the bare bones. It filled a couple of gaps in my knowledge, but I feel like it's definitely entry level beginner's guide to Passover. It's not the most detailed, but it's definitely something that can introduce children to Passover and what it is, whether they're just curious to learn more about it, or if they have a Jewish friend. It can certainly help to provide some details. It got a bit dark at one point when it started talking about plagues of different animals and things, so I think for very young children it might be a bit too much, but generally it's not too intense. It was kind of a watered down version of certain things, which obviously worked very well. I think the editing was great, the pacing was great. It cut back to Boris and the babies relatively frequently, which I thought was very well done. And I have to say I really enjoyed it. Very, very well animated, really educational, definitely filled some gaps in my knowledge and made me curious about a few things that I googled while I was watching it. And I'm really glad that Angelica also acknowledged that it was very bizarre that they were all going. Phil and Lil were also in it, in the story of Passover, which I thought was a very clever way of putting those characters into it without really stretching things and making, if Betty and Howard took Phil and Lil to Boris and Minka's, I think that's a little bit too far. I mean, to be honest, having Chuckie and Chaz there, it's a bit bizarre, but I guess that was a kind of, you're a single parent on your own, why don't you come and join the family? So I understand or kind of see why Chaz might have been invited, but yeah, if they'd also invited Phil and Lil, I think it might have been taking things a step too far. So it was nice for them to be in the story itself. I thought that was a nice workaround to still include them. This is a double feature. It takes up the full episode. And I'm glad it does. I think it needed that space, it needed that time, and it worked very well. Passover is a really solid episode. Can definitely help to teach some people about the Jewish faith. I remember we did some, when I was, primary school age, we did some information about Judaism, but not a tremendous amount, and I can't imagine we would have talked about Passover. Maybe we did, and I can't remember it. But either way, this episode is really good, very well animated, nice story structure, nice editing, really good placement of Tommy in the story as well. Definitely one that I enjoyed. And it doesn't surprise me that I remembered some bits and pieces of it, but not the whole thing. But either way, watching it now, I really enjoyed Passover.